3,000 babies a month. Taking care of our newborns is a very keen aspect for India. And that is why we at Newburgh have decided to put the baby first and begin this journey of newborn screening, wherein we will take on the aspect of quality laboratory services. We ensure that the awareness among patients is there, and also there is education for our doctors. Without further ado, I would like to now invite our first speaker, Dr. Karthik Nagesh, Chairman and HOD, Neonatology and NICU's Manipal Hospital Group, and also Chairman, Manipal Advanced Children's Center. He will be giving us a brief idea about the Indian perspective on newborn screening. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you very much. It's indeed a proud privilege and an honor to be here. Am I audible? Yes. Okay. Thank you, Jairam, for inviting me and Dr. Sujay. Jairam is a good friend for last so many years now, ever since we were together in medical college at PGI Chandigarh. I'm really happy to be talking at this forum because as I know Anand Labs for the last 27 years in Bangalore, I have been very impressed with the professionalism and the ethical practices they do and the quality of their reporting. So I am very glad also now to realize that probably you'll be entering into this field of newborn medicine, which is newborn screening, which is very, very close to my heart. So I'll be delving with, can I have a pointer? Yes. Because as I understand, this is a very heterogeneous audience. So I'll be taking you, and we have Professor Rolf here, who's an expert on newborn screening, and my own student Ravi is here, who's a pediatric neurologist of great repute in Bangalore. But I'll be therefore going from a very basic understanding of what is newborn screening and what is the way forward which we can do in this country, which probably will help some of you and to sort of garner your thoughts. In today's era, is newborn screening mandatory? I have come to a conclusion that as of just now today, it is mandatory even in this country where we say it's a low and middle income country. No, it is mandatory, and I'll tell you the reasons behind it. Look at this high resource NICU where I run a quaternary level. Our NICU is rated as what's called the highest level of intensive care at Manipal Hospital. We are labeled quaternary care NICU. This was a baby not long ago who came back from discharge. Baby was discharged after a healthy pregnancy, a normal delivery, non-consanguineous North Indian parents working both in software, and the baby goes home. Comes back on day 7 with fits and encephalopathy, acidotic, almost gasping. We had to actively resuscitate this child, and we had to do so much of intensive care, including dialysis, which is continuous renal replacement therapy, to pull this baby out. And that baby we confirmed was having maple syrup urine disease, one of the metabolic disorders, inborn metabolic disorders. And the question that the parents asked me was, Doctor, you said you have done newborn screening, which we have been doing the last 15 years. Definitely we've been doing an extended screening. For the last 25 years, probably one of the first units in the country, we have been doing congenital thyroid screening, hypothyroidism. Since 2004, we have been doing congenital adrenal hyperplasia screening also. Definitely for the last 10 years, I am doing extended screening for galactosemia, phenylketonuria, G6PD deficiency, and 2-3 others, biotinidase deficiency, cystic fibrosis I have been doing. But this baby, lo and behold, comes back so sick. It took me a big challenge. For 1.5 months, I had to ventilate this child and keep this child. And the parents repeatedly are asking me, Doctor, you said you have done newborn screening. And we came to Manipal Hospital, we had a healthy baby. Our first child is normal. This child is maple syrup urine disease, you are telling me. So it took me so much of an effort to get this baby out. This child then subsequently they shifted to Philadelphia because they found we had some good support, and clinicians in Philadelphia helped us manage this child also, and this child is waiting for a liver transplant. But the parents are happy. They were not against anything, but they just raised this question in our mind that why did you not screen? After that episode, I have been doing extended full tandem mass spectrometry for all our newborns because we feel this is the least we can do for our babies and try to do whatever is best for them. Now, having said that, what is newborn screening? I'm going to delve on this. This is going to be the learning objectives of today's talk. What are the criteria we have to adopt for newborn screening? What are the diseases to be covered? Some case studies like the one I showed you. And what are the experiences we have had in this country and others and the way forward in this country. Now, if you look at the Western story, newborn screening started in the 1930s. People in adult medicine thought that mentally retarded patients were probably having phenylketonuria because they found a high level of phenylalanine in their blood. They restricted phenylalanine in the diet and those people got better. You know, in 2013 was the 50th year of newborn screening in the world. So we are now 55 years of newborn screening in the world. So the Westerners have started screening in the 70s for hypothyroidism. In this country, we started doing it in the 90s for hypothyroidism. Many private hospitals started screening for hypothyroidism in the 90s. And hemoglobinopathies also in the 80s started. And tandem mass spectrometry in 2000 or so, it started in the Western world to look for about 40 to 50 metabolic disorders apart from the ones listed here. Robert Guthrie is probably the father of newborn screening in the world. We call it the Guthrie's test. I'm sure all of you are aware of that. This became a very, very big fad in the late 70s in the Western countries where a spot of blood would be taken on a filter paper. It was called the Guthrie's test. Even now it's called the Guthrie's test. And that would be screened. So we call it now by various names, but primarily in many countries in the world they still call it the Guthrie's test. And more parameters and more inborn metabolic errors are added to the kind of list of disorders which can be screened, and this is based on a filter paper sampling which you can see here, which I'll come to later. We got interested by what's called the National Neonatology Forum of India, which is the advocacy body for newborn health in this country. This is a professional newborn body. Close to 8,000 neonatologists in this country now are associated with this organization. We got interested in newborn screening in 2010. So 2000, elsewhere in the world, people started doing newborn screening aggressively. We started getting them. By God's grace, I had the opportunity to be the chairman of the task force for newborn screening in this country. So we published a document on based on, we had a writing group, I was the chairperson, and we published a document which clearly suggested in 2010 that universal newborn screening should be introduced in phases in our country. It should be done after 2 days. We looked at the data and suggested that the best time to do it is after 2 days after the child is born, because the initial first 48 to 72 hours there's a lot of fluctuation in the variables in the metabolites in the blood. And only if there is enough protein load which goes into the baby or enough carbohydrate load which goes into the baby, you have enough metabolites, toxic metabolites secreted in the blood, which can be then analyzed. And in preterm babies, you can even delay it a little bit, but definitely if you find anything abnormal, you have to repeat it. We had classified our, can I have a pointer please? Is there a pointer?
Sir, no, the pointer will not work because it's LED, sir.
Oh, it's okay. It's an LED screen. Yeah. But there's no mouse here. Doesn't matter. So what happened is we divided categories into 3. One is, I'll come to the categories later. So we divided and classified that 3 types of children are there who have to be properly screened for, and we have divided and given the recommendations. And we also suggested that if there's a positive screening, it should be followed with parental counseling, and confirmatory tests and genetic counseling should be done. And we clearly mentioned that a comprehensive planning for state level universal screening should be done. Many states, because there's the guidelines of the National Neonatology Forum. Now, these guidelines actually have become very popular, not only for newborn screening, for everything in neonatology. These guidelines are very popular in this country. People have even taken physicians to court based on suggestions given here that you are not followed the guidelines which have been published by the National Neonatology Forum. So there are doctors, neonatologists in this country, like the one in Ranchi, has been sued because he did carry out eye examination for the baby as per the guidelines here. So a lot of people gave a lot of respect to these guidelines, and we were 22 writing groups trying to make these guidelines, and this was published. And after that, newborn screening took off in a big way in this country, because by then the infrastructure was ready for newborn screening, because the labs were available and they were readily doing it. By the late 2000 or so, 2000, I think maybe around 2005 or 6, the labs had started working on this, and we started getting patients being referred to these labs. So around this time, we started recognizing that babies, in fact, there's a lot of sensitization of doctors also across the country, pediatricians. What can be constituted earlier days as probably a sepsis, probably a heart problem, people started sensitizing themselves more towards this being probably a metabolic disorder, which was getting missed. Earlier days, these babies would probably, like this baby, have some developmental delay, have constipation, then comes to a physician at 6 months of age, and they'll say, I don't know what's wrong, but then it's obviously hypothyroidism. So this could have been picked up when the baby was born. We had screening facilities available for the last 30 years, and treatment is so simple, just thyroxine. So people started sensitizing themselves, and also the consumer demand happened. Parents are asking how was this missed at the time of birth. So simple things like thyroid, definitely by 2010 beginning, most government institutions in this country also have started doing thyroid screening. That is because of the guidelines and plus the consumer. And such a nice way to prevent mental retardation. Such a simple thing to do. So this was around the time when these things started. Case 2, you have a 10 days baby who comes back with severe breathing difficulty and comes in shock. And this baby, 3 types always as neonatologists would think. Sepsis, some congenital heart disease, what we call critical congenital heart disease, or the third thing people started recognizing is probably a metabolic disorder like congenital adrenal hyperplasia. So you do the screening, you have the facilities. Now last 20 years this facility is there, and if you have not done it at birth, you look at it, the baby, you look at the 17-hydroxyprogesterone, you check it, and it's positive, high, you give the baby hydrocortisone and the child survives. And then, yes, long-term supplementation of hydrocortisone is required. Case 3 is the same example which I told you. We in fact published a series on, multiple babies we got with this problem. It is not that we did dialysis with renal replacement only for renal conditions. Most of the conditions which are published in our series recently has been done for metabolic disorders. And you see this other baby who got away with good intensive care, and this baby confirmed to have what is called citrullinemia, which was missed at the time of birth. So we have had so many cases, and with a large series of metabolic disorders now we are recognizing. Earlier days, even 10 to 15 years back, we would say, oh, this was some sepsis, maybe we don't know what happened, the baby came back, baby was in shock, baby died, we didn't do anything. We didn't know what happened. So now these are being recognized, and young neonatologists, young pediatricians are all being sensitized. Even in their MD courses, they are being sensitized about metabolic screening and to look for these things. So a child who is not behaving well, newborns typically, every baby looks lethargic and septic, but it may not be sepsis alone. So people started recognizing that something like metabolic disorders does happen. So what are the major disorders we had to look for? If you look at the most important in our own working group that we decided, we thought the treatable diseases, very important thing to be recognized early before they become symptomatic, is hypothyroidism, congenital adrenal hyperplasia, G6PD deficiency. It can cause severe jaundice, causing sometimes kernicterus. Intravascular hemolysis can occur with that. Hemoglobinopathies, they give you time. They don't present at birth, but they are devastating. Thalassemias, sickle cell anemias, etc. Congenital critical heart disease. This is of course not a metabolic disorder, but this is a very important disorder. With the baby, as soon as the baby is born, you think baby is fine. But then 5 days later, the baby becomes sick because the child has got what's called a hypoplastic left heart syndrome. How do you recognize this at the time of birth? You've got 100 deliveries per month in some hospital. How do they make out? So simple pulse oximetry test was devised, and this has come into. So that's another form of screening. You have now universal hearing screening. American Academy of Pediatrics in 1997 published that you should do universal hearing screening, because by the time you make out the child is deaf, it's too late, even for cochlear transplants or whatever you can do. So that also becomes important to screen for at the time of birth. That is why most hospitals now in cities like Bangalore would screen with otoacoustic emission testing at the time of discharge, before the baby goes home. So that's another type of screening. You check for heart disease before the baby goes home. You check for jaundice before the baby goes home. And now, added to this armamentarium is this other extended metabolic disorders like this. And things like even cystic fibrosis. And as Jairam said, you would even now screen for immunodeficiency before the child is going home. You have the facilities. That's the next step. People are going to do that now. So, what is newborn screening program? Basically, it's an integrated system that you are doing universal screening. You don't let anybody get out of the system. That is the best thing to have. As I was mentioning to you before, just think that in Bangalore, all the deliveries which take place on a particular day, you screen all the babies. Then you're not letting anything slip out of your hands. But that is happening. That is why morbidity and mortality is still high in newborns in this country. Forget sepsis, forget other reasons, but this itself is becoming a major issue. Now Kerala, for example, their newborn mortality rate has come to below 10. 10, that is one of the best states in this country. Bihar is the worst. Karnataka is okay. We have 16 about the urban and about 22 in the rural newborn mortality rate. But then you look at Europe. Europe is around 6. Would you say it's about 6 or 8 per thousand? So where can you further reduce it? You can further reduce it by getting rid of newborn metabolic disorders, screening them well, and treating them before they become symptomatic. The best thing is newborn metabolic disorders, you get time. You get time, they are not likely to become very sick very soon. You have some time, and therefore you can screen. And if the turnaround time for the lab test is, let's say, 48 hours or 72 hours, you can pick it up, confirm it, and then start treating the child. So that is what is newborn screening all about. So it should become an integral part of newborn care. We're all very keen that it happens. Early detection, as I said, it can even prevent morbidity. Like congenital hypothyroidism, you can have mental retardation due to tyrosinemia, phenylketonuria. They may not cause death, but there's mental retardation. So you can prevent it if that is addressed very soon. This is not a very good slide, but essentially the criteria for which disorders to screen was published as way back as in 1968 by Professor Wilson and Jannah. So I'll come to that. This is more clearer. Diseases to be screened, we have to identify, like the ones I decided earlier. This is the program. You can either start a small program in your hospital, or you can have a statewide program or a national program. Like I showed you, the guidelines were national guidelines which I formulated with my writing group. Now in Manipal Hospital, we made some hospital guidelines. But we failed there because that baby came back with multi-organ dysfunction. So we rectified it, and now we are screening for everything. Whatever disorder, we just screen for it. It's just, after all, a drop of blood and a little cost. So we worked up to the company, as I was discussing earlier, we worked out a very small cost and extended the newborn screening. So we have level 1 screening, which is only hypothyroidism and congenital adrenal hyperplasia. We have extended newborn screening, which includes the other 6 disorders which we are doing. Now we have a very extended newborn screening where we do all the metabolic disorders. Now, it's an important public health problem. If you look at the country, if so many children with mental retardation can be avoided, the next generation is going to be better. Just think of it. You know, Vellore has published their results that newborn hypothyroidism is 1 in 700 incidents in that area. They've done a large public health assessment trial. 1 out of 700 babies are hypothyroid, and they have the potential to have low IQ. Just think about it. And our next generation is these babies. So why not just screen them with one simple test, and then you have all these babies getting better and getting treated with thyroid treatment. So we have to realize that treatment is available and at reasonable cost. So we have to select those disorders. Now, which are the list of conditions for which screening needs to be carried out? Now, if it is a country like Europe, or Britain, where NHS pays for everything, they would of course score a little bit about spending so much money on all the babies, but they still think it's worth. I'll show you some data about what happens in the United States. They think it's worth it because one mental retardation prevented is worth it. That's the way they look at it. Hospitals can decide or governments can decide. I was just mentioning earlier, if we take this program to Government of Karnataka and we say, okay, all newborns, that's what Goa did. About 8 years back, Goa did. All newborns in Goa are screened. Goa government pays for it. And they have a lot of consanguinity, a lot of Parsi families and Goans. So they thought it's worth it to pick up these metabolic disorders, and the government has subsidized it. It's a private player which is screening, but it's through, I think Neogen or some lab is doing it, but it is subsidized. The government is paying for it. And they pick up. So likewise, we have to decide which are the disorders, and then people think initially it's a cost-intensive exercise. It is not. In the long run, there is data to show that it is not. If you pick up these disorders early, you have less morbidity, less hospitalization, and less mental retardation. So that's how people would look at it. Now, what are the conditions which are to be included for newborn screening? The condition should have an important health problem. As I said, phenylketonuria in this country is also 1 is to 10,000 is the incidence. Congenital, the maple syrup using disease is close to 1 is to 7,000. But this is enough reason for us to screen. So you should know. Congenital hypothyroidism is the priority. 1 is to 700 to 1,000 is the incidence. The test should be acceptable to the population. That means it should be reliable and simple. It's so simple. 1 drop of blood and you can get it done. The disease does not manifest at birth or on routine checkup. You don't know, the baby looks so fine. And you have to therefore screen the baby. That's important. The treatment, if required, will prevent further mortality and morbidity. That's important. Delay in diagnosis, which can cause irreversible damage. That's also important. And the screening is cost effective. All these criteria are usually met for the disorders which I have discussed earlier. And the disorder should be such serious that the lack of it would result in mortality or severe morbidity. This is very important. So, similar slides, basically there should be effective treatment. The best time to do it is 48 to 72 hours, and the report acceptability should be within about 7 days after the child is born. In preterms, you can delay it a little bit up to 2 weeks of age. Usual sampling method is through a dried filter paper with a heel prick blood sample. Now, these technologies should be available. I don't know much. I'm not much trained in lab, but nevertheless, TSH, if I understand, the best would be radioimmunoassay, and the TSH is the best for detecting congenital hypothyroidism. Hemoglobinopathies through HPLC, the liquid chromatography. PCR for also now people are using for hemoglobinopathies. Then you have Tandem spectrometry for organic acids, amino acids, and fatty acids, and lysosomal storage disorders. And genetics for cystic fibrosis. So these things are available. Now in a city like Bangalore, it's all available. You should be doing it. The acceptable samples are heel prick or from the dorsal hand vein or from a good peripheral vein. Never a blood sample should be taken from where there is some infusion of lipid solutions, and babies most of the times in the NICU we are giving lipids, etc., proteins, ideally to be avoided. Unacceptable samples are cord. So cord blood, earlier days there was some data that people would analyze TSH on the cord, not at all acceptable. So we have to wait for the baby to be at least 48 to 72 hours old and then send the screening. Samples in contact with EDT and citrate are a strict no. Contaminated with water or urine or formula milk is absolutely no. And squeeze samples are best avoided. Classical way to take the sample is the heel prick sample with a lancet with a free flowing blood, and that's the way the blood sample should be put in the holes on the filter paper there. And good documentation should happen, typically in the UK, where multiple samples are taken from multiple hospitals, but the nodal centers are very scattered. All this data is fed in by the nurse or the doctor doing it. The blood sample is dried and then sent in an envelope by mail, and probably in 48 hours there is a turnaround time and the report is available. So I'm sure. So if the screen is negative, the case is complete. See, all these screening tests have to be very sensitive. They have to have very less false negative. They can have false positive. Then in that case, we can pick up the child for better advanced testing. But false negative should not have much. If the test is borderline, like TSH is borderline, we repeat the sample. And if it is negative, the child is okay. If it's positive, then send the child to a specialty center. Actually, that's how we work on it. So this is how exactly most of us would work as soon as the report comes back. But there is a lot of extra help required. If it is some metabolic disorder like maple syrup urine disease or PKU, we need a lot of help from biochemistry. We need to sample the baby often for metabolites, which the biochemist has to help us with. We need genetics counseling, people who are experts in the treatment of these babies. We need formulas, specific formulas, like we need a PKU diet, we need a specific diet for eliminating the toxic amino acids in the diet. So many companies now in Bangalore are making these diets. They are not to be imported. I distinctly remember 20 years back I had a maple syrup urine disease where I got the test done not through screening, through the standard lab testing. Those days, Mead Johnson was the only company manufacturing the Msu D diet. And those days, internet was not great. So we had to write a letter, and the baby was somehow surviving with us. And Mead Johnson was kind enough to give a lifetime supply of Msu D diet for that child. But these parents, the stupidity they did is when the child became 6 months old, they said now the child can eat everything and started giving kanji and ragi and all that, and child died. So these things are very important. They have to be sensitized. Parental counseling is important. Genetic counseling is important. The child looks good because the diet is helping the child. Because you have eliminated leucine, isoleucine and valine from the diet. And therefore the child is doing well. That's the Msu D diet. So these things are now available in Bangalore-like cities. Now Pristine Organics is a company here which makes all these diets. And they have counselors who can sit to the parent. We have genetic counselors also available who can sit and discuss, because the active the person who's so busy who's picked up, like a neonatologist can't do all these things. So you need the backup. So once we have screened the baby and it's positive, you need a backup. So you need an advisory team, you need people to help this parent. So these are the metabolic disorders which we can in cities like Bangalore pick up, and these are the ones which are likely to create trouble. Galactosemia is the easiest to treat. You just eliminate galactose in the diet and the child is so fine. Now, these are the so-called high-risk situations. Now, I showed you this girl. This is a situation where the child is likely to be having a life-threatening disorder. Child becomes very sick in the next few days. Like I showed you the multi-organ dysfunction. These are the babies who give some time, like congenital adrenal hyperplasia, galactosemia, but they are still likely to become very sick in the next 15 days after birth. So you have to be able to pick them up. That means there's a need to get these reports back in time before the child becomes sick. Before these babies, we can lose these babies easily. There's a moderate risk group like the congenital hypothyroidism. You have time. You have time till, let's say, 3 weeks or 2 weeks of age. So you have to pick it up before. PKU gives you some time. Other disorders also need to be started on treatment by 3 weeks of age. You need to start in the low risk group maybe by 1 month of age. Things like cystic fibrosis. Once you get a screening, you confirm it again, and then you would probably need to start some treatment. You have SCID, like subacute combined immunodeficiency, you definitely need to start treatment by 1 month of age before it becomes sick. So, are we having the facilities available? We have to ask ourselves. We have it. Blood sample is easy. You have these specific filter papers which are available. Now, other screenings I told you, we have pulse oximeter for heart disease screening. We have hearing devices for hearing screening. We have jaundice assessments with transcutaneous bilirubin. All this we are doing. Now, we have trained laboratory personnel and technicians to screen these babies. And we have great nodal labs which can do this. Like Anand Lab can be a big nodal lab. Just think that you start a statewide program. Samples are reaching to you from Chitradurga and Gulbarga overnight. All newborns. You look at all newborns in the state. You said 60,000 deliveries per month. Where is this figure from?
There is a population.
No, 27 million babies are born per year in India. So it is not 60,000 deliveries per month in India. There is a huge population growth in India. So you have babies delivering all the time. So what happens in Vanivilas Hospital, which is government hospital here, there are close to 20,000 deliveries per month only in Vanivilas Hospital. So just think that those samples have come to you. It's like a factory in the Western countries. It's the whole, all samples are being rushed. And the lab is so busy sampling them. And the turnaround time is only 48 hours. And then you send the sample report back by email or whatever you have. And the clinician has to take a decision. So this is something I envisage. We should start it at least in Karnataka. With the labs like yours, we should start. We should do it for the... See, private sector is okay. There anyway, there's a resource-rich situation. Resource poor is where a lot of things are going wrong. And look at the mental retardation. Even if you screen only congenital hypothyroidism, for all the babies in Karnataka, one single nodal lab is doing it, good state-of-art reports, and thyroxine is started by the time the child is 2 weeks old. You've done your job. You look at it this way, you're doing such a great service. And I think Anand Lab should take the initiative for this. So, the samples are couriered. So this is what we had envisaged in that writing group. All these samples are being sent to the nodal center. The report goes back, and if there is a confusion, then further assessments are done in higher centers or higher labs also. We have all the technology, diagnostic equipment available for all these things. It's readily available. I don't know the instruments, names of these instruments, but most of them I'm sure are available now. I'm sure. Does treatment improve outcomes? Definitely. Look at the treatment options, such a simple thing. Congenital adrenal hyperplasia, you got to give hydrocortisone. Orally, maple syrup uric disease, diet changes, and then, yes, liver transplant, but at least the parents have something to look forward to. Those parents who are sitting now in Philadelphia, they are waiting for a transplant. As soon as it's done, their child is good. Liver transplant is a one-time full treatment for them. And in Bangalore, in Manipal Hospital, last week also there was a child transplanted. So transplants are now done all the time. Child, small child. Then citrullinemia, there is treatment. Like I said, all these have treatment. Look at methylmalonic acidemia. Simple thiamine is the treatment. Moderate risk group also, good treatment. Thyroid, you have treatment. PK, you have dietary changes. Cystic fibrosis, you have this thing, hemoglobin disorders, you have bone marrow transplants being done now. So you pick it up early. Is it cost effective? Newborn screening, it is. If you look at the disorders, hypothyroidism, you need to spend what, I don't know the cost of newborn screening for hypothyroidism, but I think it's very minimal because some labs like ThyroCare offer it for a very small amount. And if you pick it, that's cost effective. I think it straight away says cost effective. Metabolic disorders, if you club them all together, it's 1 in 1,000 is the metabolic disorders. You have hemoglobinopathies, 1:500 disorders. So you have good data there to tell you that it is worth doing this screening. The United States screens 4 million babies per year. Their incidence overall is about 1:2,000 is the metabolic disorders in their country. Now, what they feel is if they pick up 2,000 cases per year, which otherwise would have had low IQ, they have done it. It's really worth for them to do it. So they do it as a large program and insurance is involved, or even Medicaid is involved in that. Screening for congenital hypothyroidism in America costs only $5 per patient. And for the US totally per year is $20 million. But I think it's worth screening if they pick up those 2,000 babies. So there's a lot of health impact if you look at the long term. So I think it's really, it makes a case for newborn screening, definitely. I'll skip this slide. So what are the proposed things which we have proposed in our clinic? Congenital hypothyroidism, adrenal hyperplasia, G6PD, and hearing. This is definitely to be done, compulsorily to be done, whether it's government or private, you have to do it. Then we are given extended category A. This was category A, that all these things have to be done. What is category B is, if you can read this, if the mother has had previous babies who have unexplained had mental retardation or died or there's consanguinity, those all babies are sick, then do that. That is a category B. Category C would be for a resource-rich circumstances, like Manipal Hospital, Cloud9. Do it all. Like I told you, you started doing for all, that is resource-rich. But ideally, all babies should be done. Even if it's a very poor family delivering in a government hospital, we should be doing it. Why not? Because all the treatments are available and they're not very costly. Now, if you have all these diets and all that, and you put together the system, the treatments are not very, if it's picked up early. The harms are only about the false positives, but that can be tackled. People can recognize there is a false positive, have like G6PD, you get a low, then go and get a metabolite properly screened again. Now you have genetics for G6PD, and you can look at the mutation and confirm it is not or not, is positive or not. I don't think we should talk too much about the negatives of newborn screening. Newborn screening is to be taken up in a good way. And definitely there is good impact on the babies with chronic diseases also. You can do better if you pick up diseases faster. Look at this nice statement which one parent has made in one website. Nothing is more devastating than learning after a few months or years down the line that a child with terrible disease could have been treated had the newborn screening taken place before the child was leaving the hospital. So this is the impact we have, that parents feel, what if we had picked this up earlier? So why not we give a chance to these parents, wherever they are from. And WHO has recommended that if a country has a newborn mortality rate of 40 or less, you should start newborn screening. See, priorities are different in different countries. Like I said, in India, we got multiple states. Bihar is still grappling with a newborn mortality rate of 50, let's say. But they are grappling with basic things where there is no oxygen, there is no person to resuscitate a baby at birth, and asphyxia, sepsis, all that. But Kerala is grappling with this problem of how to get it better than 9. So they can start newborn screening for all their babies. It's worth it because they can bring it down to 5 maybe. That is important. So we have that is what the Europeans have done. They have not done newborn screenings on all babies. So we have to decide what is important. But even if some hospitals or some centers in the like Goa state has decided, though their newborn mortality rate was still high, they decided it's worth it because they have a lot of inbreeding and consanguinity. They felt it was worth doing newborn screening. So you have to think like that. So the way forward is definitely to go for screening, definitely for congenital hypothyroidism, adrenal hyperplasia, G6PD and galactosemia. You can get good accurate results and confirm once more before the therapy is instituted. So this is the checklist we have for babies when they are going home. And you can see now we have added newborns. This is like in our hospital a checklist. So it is there. We have added newborn screening. So typically before the baby goes home, we check whether the baby weight is whatever is the weight, breastfeeding is established, has the baby passed urine, stool, hips are okay, cleft palate is ruled out, genitals are okay, bilirubin level, saturations, vaccinations given, newborn screening. So newborn screening is here to stay, and we should look at it very, very actively and proactively, and it is definitely going to be important in the days to come. So thank you. I'll just stop short here. Any questions are welcome.
Did you come across any false negatives?
False negatives, no, false negatives, unfortunately, you're right. Not really, not really, no. I don't think I missed anything. See, if at all we have missed anything, it would have come to our notice, because these parents are the ones who are closely on for. In a private sector research, rich circumstances, parents always come back to us. I don't think we have come across.
Initially, the newborn screening can be positive, and later on the child may be suspected with a metabolic disorder, and then we do a screening, symptomatic screening, that time it can become positive. So such
No, you
cases
mean to say
have
false positive.
false negative. Like in the newborn screening, it is positive. I mean, newborn screening is negative. Subsequently, the child gets admitted in the NICU, and we suspect a metabolic disorder, and then screen once more. That time the child can be screened positive.
So that's what Dr. Sujay asked me. I have not come across anything like that. But do you have any specific example, or you remember any such case?
Yes, as of now,
No, I have not come across
even
this.
I too have
No.
not come across such
No,
cases.
I have
Like
not.
I'm
That's
just
why.
thinking like.
No, most of
doing
these
this.
screening tests have been vetted, and they have proven to be very good in terms of sensitivity, and they have almost negligible false negative. So I think you can accept it if a screen is negative. Professor Ralph maybe can answer that.
Yeah, I think you have to bear in mind that metabolic disorders are not yes or no. It's a continuum from healthy to severely affected. And there are reports like glutaric aciduria type 1. There are several reports in the literature where cases have not been detected because the level of the metabolites at the time of screening in the mild variants are so low that they are not distinguishable from the normal population. So you have to expect that over time, in certain mild cases, you will have missed the case due to just biology, that you cannot find that with the test because the metabolites are not yet elevated.
I think the point is well taken. And the other thing is the interpretations require a very astute biochemical consultant to do that. So sometimes you may get it because of that. If the biochemistry of the TMS is interpreted not correctly, then you may have. I've had lots of false positives, definitely lots of false positives. The other thing, if you have not screened the baby at the correct time, see, the metabolite has to accumulate in the blood, and then, because as Professor Ralph said, sometimes they are not accumulated enough. If it's a mild disorder, let's say a cofactor deficiency, it's not good enough to become very symptomatic, or a lot of metabolites are not high in the blood. But if you have done the test, let's say too early, or the child has been kept fasting after birth for some reason, there's not enough protein accretion. Yes.
Sorry, that is the right time, even if the baby has no. The catabolic time when the baby loses weight. So you don't need protein load because the baby loads himself with protein that he
See, actually, I do agree. Especially if the condition is very bad, like methylmalonic acidemia, there is protein losing state, there's a catabolic state, so therefore there's a lot of metabolites produced. I agree, but there are milder disorders which, let's say, phenylketonuria, unless enough protein, or let's say galactosemia, unless enough carbohydrate gets into the baby, only then you get the metabolite in the blood, isn't it?
Yes, if you measure, for galactosemia, you're right, when the baby has no lactose enough, then galactose is normal. But for the beta oxidation disorders, the catabolic phase where the baby relies on fatty acid oxidation, metabolites rise, and in VLCAT you often have a second sample when you want to confirm it, that metabolites, when the baby is anabolic, they're low back to normal because beta oxidation is turned off. So for some disorders, to wait too long is always also not.
Yeah. Actually, that is why I said you need, after the sample report comes, you need a very astute professor like Dr. Rolf to be able to analyze it, seeing the clinical condition of the child. So we have a clinician, we need a very good biochemical expert who has to be on a day-to-day basis interacting, and then we also need a geneticist who's trained in metabolic disorders. So we need a team like that, and a nutritionist who is able to formulate a diet plan. All this is part of the whole cycle. So we cannot do this and not have that in place. 15 years back, this was a mistake done by certain labs which first entered into this arena. They got into it and said, we're going to do newborn screening. But then, people are not prepared. Neonatologists, like my own unit, we are not prepared for what was to happen. So we get a report, confused, we'll say, okay, if this is so, where is the answer for treatment? Now, things have come into place. In cities like Bangalore, we don't have a pure geneticist only in this day, but we have access to such people who are in Chennai. We have some people. We have access to nutritionists. We have access to good biochemists who can analyze it on a day-to-day basis and give us some idea what is to be done. So that is why these babies we were able to pull out. And they are doing well. The baby with the citrullinemia is now at least 5 years old. This paper we published in 5 years back. The child is doing well. So we have now the facilities to do it. That's what I'm saying. But we need good people to help us interpret all this. So I'll just thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Karthik, for that wonderful session. I just like to correct the figure. It's 50,000 per day. So I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Ralph Shingahat, Director, Swiss Newborn Screening Laboratory, University Children's Hospital, Zurich, Switzerland. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, and thank you for the invitation, and also thank you for your talk, because you mentioned already a lot of things which I can totally agree. Can I? Oh, this doesn't work. So newborn screening worldwide since 52 years, and in some countries 0 years. I've been asked to cover these 4 aspects: current state and data analysis more globally, future of newborn screening, essentials of testing, and testing strategy for newborn screening. And I would like to turn it a little bit around and put some history also in it to show a little bit about newborn screening, how it started. You mentioned already a lot of it, only perhaps in one point we must discuss when it started, whether the dietary treatment for PKU started in the 30s already. I think it was in the 50s. Okay, what is newborn screening? It's mainly to pick out from all these healthy children this one, in order to prevent mental retardation. What you see here, 2 brothers with PKU, and to provide this healthy young people that grow up and work and live and learn. And prevention is better than healing, and in some of these disorders, healing is not possible once the disease has started. Okay, inborn errors of metabolism was first introduced by Sir Archibald Garrett in 1908. And already in the 20s, there was a young American woman that lived in China who had a child that could not grow, that was mentally retarded, and she went around in the US to find a doctor to tell her what her child has. And this is something you already talked about. It's very important to include the parents, and sometimes the parents pushed also the physicians. And this was Pearl S. Buck. She got a Nobel Prize for Literature in the 30s, and she wrote a book about her travel around an odyssey to find a diagnosis for a disabled child. And there were a Danish couple who was a little bit more lucky. They also had 2 children with PKU, what they did not know at that time. And they came around this guy, Dr. Asbjørn Felling, from Oslo, and they went to Oslo and pursued him to test her children and to find out what was the cause of the mental disability of their children. And perhaps the mother took buckets of urine of her children to Felling's laboratory, and he found out that the urine, when it was treated with ferric chloride, turned green, and normal urine stayed colorless. And this is still in chemistry called the Felling test. And what he then found out, he could find this substance, and you may recognize it. It's phenyl pyruvate, which is a ketone, and therefore the name of the disorder is phenylketonuria came from. And then in the 30s there was a diagnosis for PKU but no treatment. And again there was a mother who won't give up, and it was the mother of Sheila Jones, and hospital diagnosed her child to have PKU in Birmingham at that time. And but the mother of Sheila Jones, she was not lucky with only this diagnosis, so she went every day to the hospital, and nowadays we would say she really stalked hospital to pursue him to find a treatment. And then they started to check with a London group also to make a diet free of phenylalanine, and Sheila was the first patient to be treated with these phenylalanine low diets, which was produced from casein, and at that time that must be really a horrible taste compared to nowadays. But she was the first patient to be treated. Of course, her disability stayed on, but the progression was stopped. And then another personal fate enabled the first newborn screening. You saw this picture already in the talk before. Bob Guthrie, but he had never the intention and was not really at the beginning interested in inborn errors of metabolism. He was doing cancer research. But he himself had a disabled child, and at a meeting of parents, of a parents group, there was another parent with a child with PKU who talked to him and said, hey, why don't you find a test? You're a laboratory man. Why can't you find a test to test these babies for PKU? There was this diaper test with the ferric chloride, which is very unsensitive, which was also started in the 1950s, but this only picked up the very severe cases. And then Bob Guthrie developed this bacterial inhibition assay, which was the first time that a huge number of samples could be tested in a short time. And afterwards, and the other picture is a picture in Zurich, he went around the world on a promotion tour, we would say. So he went around with his test and tried to pursue all metabolic physicians, pediatricians, to start newborn screening worldwide. So that's a little bit history. And here you see, we made it to the Swiss television. You see how the heel prick is done. And this is really easy. And if the mother is there and calms the child, it's also not very, very painful for the child. And this is always done when some other tests in the hospital are done anyway. Okay, how is the situation worldwide? And this are data from the International Society for Neonatal Screening. And you see it in red, the countries where over 80% of babies are screened. Then the lighter red is 20%, or less than 20%. And then in the dark color, there's the countries that have no newborn screening at all so far. And since we heard already about mortality rate, and when you look at the mortality rate worldwide, then you see again, and if we put this together, you see those countries that have more than 80% newborn screening are those that have the lowest mortality rate. And perhaps in Central Africa, there are other problems that cause death of the babies with mortality rates more than 100 per thousand. There are other things to do rather than doing newborn screening. But in all other parts, newborn screening is now really needed and should be promoted. And concerning what should we screen, the US, they have this so-called RUSP, the Recommended Uniform Screening Panel, with some core conditions, and I just want to comment on a few of them. One of the core conditions for metabolic disorders is also propionic acidemia and methylmalonic acidemia. However, a German study has proven that newborns that were detected with PA and classical MMA do not really they don't do better than those that are picked up clinically. So the outcome of early detected and clinically detected is more or less the same. Then there are some disorders like the 3-methylproteonyl-CoA carboxylase deficiency, 3-hydroxy-3-methylglutaric aciduria, and beta-ketothiolase deficiency, which have one problem, that 3-MCC deficiency, which they all have the same marker metabolite, and 3-MCC deficiency is a disorder with a very low penetrance. So most of the patients with 3-MCC deficiency never get symptomatic. But if you want to detect the other two conditions, you will pick also the others. And then for the endocrine disorders, we have heard about that, so that is not really something new. Then for the lysosomal storage disorders like MPS1 and peroxisomal like X-linked adrenal leukodystrophy, I think there's one thing missing that is very important. When you do screening for a disorders, I think you have to have a test, a confirmatory test, which can, with a high specificity, tell you, after you have a positive screening, whether this baby is affected or not. And in the lysosomal storage disorders, there's very often a very long delay and very, very frequent clinical evaluation of the patient to pick the time when a patient needs this enzyme replacement therapy. And these kind of disorders, for my opinion, is a big burden on newborn screening. And unless this problem of a really 100% diagnostic test to say yes or no, I would not propose to include them into newborn screening. But Or it's my personal. In the US, there are some in some states included, and a lot of pediatricians they like this screening. They say those that are really affected, that helps them, but the burden on the false positives in these disorders is very high. And then they have a kind of the secondary conditions also defined. That's a little bit the same like we heard before. Here in India, we have the primary disorders. And 10 years ago, we had a review of our newborn screening test where we defined a lot of things also. And I will tell a little bit afterwards laboratory testing for Msu D, and especially also for CPD1 deficiency, which is a devastating disorder when it's not treated, and the treatment is extremely easy with medium chain fatty acids. The disorder itself it's extremely rare, like 1 in 400,000 perhaps, but I will show you that you can have a screening test which is 100% sensitive with no false positives. And then 10 years ago, there were some disorders like SCID, where at that time we said, we don't know whether it makes sense. It's proposed, but not yet recommended. And since January this year, we started SCID screening in Switzerland. And in the first 2 weeks, we got our first 2 patients with severe combined deficiency. We had one agammaglobulinopathy. So we had in the first 2 weeks already 3 now confirmed positive cases, which we were really astonished because we thought we would find 1 or 2 per year. Okay, now I will focus a little bit on tandem mass spectrometry, and I will just throw all the disorders that you can test with tandem mass spectrometry here on the screen. And now you can look at everything, and then you can try to choose which one would be the first to screen for. So now what I will do is I will just take the font size of all these disorders according to their prevalence or their incidence. And at the end, you might very easily be able to choose which disorders you should screen for, or you should focus on first when you do expanded tandem mass spectrometry in newborn screening. So from all these 45 or 50 disorders that can be screened for and that are screened for in the US with tandem mass spectrometry, you see what's left. It's mainly PKU. It's MCAT deficiency, which is a very good disorder to screen for because untreated or unrecognized patients can die during a fasting period. And you don't need any treatment. You mainly need frequent feeding and avoiding fasting. You can give carnitine, or you can, or you don't. It doesn't matter too much. And then this one in different colors is homocystinuria, which would be a good disorder to screen for. However, the problem with tandem mass spectrometry, if you only use methionine as a marker metabolite, you're too late. So even the classical homocystinuria, methionine rises only around at 2 weeks of age. So we did 10 years, tried to pick out homocystinuria in Bavaria with expanded newborn screening, and we only picked 2, which just by chance we got a second sample after a protein load when the babies were 2 or 3 weeks old. So here we need homocysteine as a primary marker, which is at the moment not yet easily adoptable with the amino acid and azocarnitines. Then I will show you a few results from my time in Bavaria, in Munich. In these 10 years, we screened 1.6 million samples. We had a total incidence of 1 in 1,400, which is more or less the same for this expanded newborn screening worldwide. And you could see when we divide this, on the right-hand side, we have those classical conditions with classical tests, one test per disorder. So we detect around 50% of the cases with 4 to 5 assays, and the left side are those that can be detected with tandem mass spectrometry. So the other 50% of cases were detected with one assay. And in Switzerland in 2011 we added cystic fibrosis. So if we would have added cystic fibrosis, we would have like 50% nearly again detected with one additional assay, and the other one would be the same. So incidence also makes a lot impact to decide what you should screen for. Now I want to go a little bit into the technical aspects, maybe not too deep, so that everyone can get an impression what we talk about when we say tandem mass spectrometry. So it's tandem because we have two mass specs, the MS1, which separates the analytes by molecular weight. Then we have a collision cell where the analytes are fragmented in specific fragments, and then we have the second MS, which identifies these specific fragments. And this we have a complete amino acid nasal carnitine profile from 3 microliter whole blood within 2.5 minutes. And this is how it works. Here's the capillary where the sample is sprayed into the mass spec, and there's there's a high voltage, a few thousand volts, which puts a charge onto these droplets, which then go onto the analytes, and then the solvent is evaporated, and then the free ions are going into the mass spec. And in the first part, so it's a little bit confusing. We always call it tandem mass spectrometry, but the instruments are called triple quadrupoles because they have a kind of a magnetic lens. Then they have the Q1, which is the first mass spec, which then only lets analytes with the same mass into this collision cell, where they collide with an inert gas, which then gives specific fragments, which are then analyzed in the second one. And I will show you this again with phenylalanine as an example. What we need to add into our extraction solution is a stable isotope labeled internal standard, and it can be carbon-13, or it can be deuterium, which has a higher mass than the phenylalanine from the blood. So we have a microtiter plate with 69 blood spots. We have phenylalanine unlabeled from the blood spot. We add the labeled phenylalanine in the extraction solution. And then you have a profile from a normal, healthy newborn, and below you see the profile from a baby with phenylketonuria, and you see the peak for phenylalanine for the internal standard. And then I think it's simple for everybody in the audience to distinguish a big AU profile from a normal profile. And that's what's happening in the mass spec. Of course, with a few hundred or thousand samples per day, you don't look at the profiles, so the machine does the calculation and just give you the concentrations of the things. And that is a little bit more chemistry. So we have the phenylalanine, which has a positive charge, it loses water, it loses CO, and then we have this specific fragment. And with these two informations, we can calculate the concentration of phenylalanine in one sample with the related internal sample. So a little excursion into biochemistry or mass spectrometry. Now the question was, how many samples can a lab manage per day, per week? And these are all data also from the Munich lab. So at the beginning we had 125,000 samples from Bavaria, which we started with, which would be a weekly load, the yellow ones, between like nearly 3,000 samples per week in our lab. Then there came 2 other states also to our lab, so we got at the peak around 5,000 samples per week. So this is easily, that is 240,000, there were 240,000 samples per year in this lab. And we had 3 mass specs, 3 immunoassay analyzers, so that's around what you need. If you start with 100,000 samples or 120, you need always 2 instruments because you need 1 backup. And then for every 50,000 or every 100,000, you add another instrument. And so this orange line would be what I calculated the weekly births for Bangalore. I came around 3,500 per week, but probably that was not 100% correct. But I think this is a number that could be managed in one lab, in principle. And also, I had for Bangalore 180,000 per year, would be 3,000 per day. Results that must be interpreted for the classical 5 disorders. When you now look at 35 analytes that you do with Tandem mass spectrometry, or I calculated 30,000, then you have with 180,000 births per year, you have 20,000 analytes that you must interpret per day in your lab. Or more than 6 million single values when you look at Tandem MS, TSH, 7-HP, and so forth. So how can you do that? And just keep in mind, if you have a normal distribution, these are the standard deviations, percentiles. So in newborn screening, normally we use the cutoff of the 99.9 centile, or plus minus the 4 standard deviation. And if you look then at the number of parameters that you use, and if you look at every single parameters with Tandem MS, and you would recall on a basis of every single analyte, which is outside the reference range, you would end up with a recall rate between 5 and 10%, which would really be, I think, unacceptable for a screening program if you would recall 5 or 10% of your babies that you screen. So can we improve that? I have 2 examples for that. One would be CPD1 deficiency, which in 1999, when we started newborn screening, expanded newborn screening in Bavaria, in a publication from the group from Ron Wonders, when you looked at fatty acid oxidation disorders, you see on the right side normal free carnitine or normal acyl carnitine, free carnitine, normal or elevated, could be CPD1 deficiency. And what you need to do is do lymphocyte analysis to pick up CPD1 deficiency. And when we look at the acyl carnitine profiles from a normal newborn and one with CPD1 deficiency, you really see it's only free carnitine. And if free carnitine is normal, then still doesn't rule out CPD1 deficiency. And this is the metabolic pathway, so the long chain fatty acids, they are activated to the acyl-CoAs, and then CPD1 transfers the acyl-carnitine moiety from CoA to carnitine to form acyl-carnitines. And in the case when CPD1 deficiency is not working, then carnitine will be elevated inside the mitochondria, and subsequently the transporter stops transporting carnitine into the mitochondria, and also in plasma or in the blood we find elevated free carnitine. That was at that time thought to be the only marker. But when we look a little bit more close, when this pathway doesn't work, then we should see decreased long chain acyl-carnitines. And we go back to this profile and we look at the range of the long chain acyl-carnitines. Then you see there's C18, C16 around 480. You see the peaks in the normal one, and in CPD1 deficiency you see nothing. And this is how the distribution looks like for free carnitine. The red bars is the normal population. The blue circles are babies that are on carnitine supplementation, which is not so uncommon in intensive care. So they would have high free carnitine, which would match to CPD1 deficiency. And the orange crosses are samples from patients with CPD1 deficiency. And you see we have two patients that are nearly, one is normal, one is nearly normal. So what Ron Wonder said about free carnitine is really true. But when we look at the long chain acyl-carnitines like carnitine, you see all the CPD1 have low concentrations, while those on carnitine supplementation have all normal concentrations of long chain acyl-carnitines. So if you go back to this metabolic pathway and we reduce everything that is unnecessary, then this metabolic pathway directly tells us what we need to do in order to have a sensitive and specific test. So we have free carnitine divided by the sum of the long chain acyl-carnitines, and with this ratio we have a perfect distribution, separation from the normal newborns, even those on carnitine supplementation, to those with CPD1 deficiency. And the scale at the bottom, the x-axis, just to remind you, this is a logarithmic scale. So this is not linear, this is logarithmic. So for CPD1 deficiency, when we used only free carnitine as a marker, we had a high specificity. The specificity was good, but the sensitivity was only like 30%. If we would look only at the low C16, we would have a high sensitivity, but still specificity would be bad. If we put also C18 together, but at the end, if we use this ratio, we have 100% sensitivity, we have 100% specificity, and in 10 years in Bavaria, when I did screening there, we had picked up the positive cases and had no false positive. So even for disorder with an incidence of 1 in 400,000, you can easily include this into the newborn screening when you have the right parameters to look for and to calculate. And this is how we do the interpretation. So we don't look at only single analytes one by one, but we put them in kind of disordered blocks. So we have MCAT, C6, C8, C10, and specific ratios, so that the interpretation of the whole number of analytes per day, even 1,000, is very easy and could be even more automated. So rather than only looking at elevated CD8, C10, looking at blocks of analytes, including specific ratios, which makes the whole thing much more sensitive and much more specific and easy to interpret. We have the same for the amino acids. And now for Msu D, which is also a very rare disorder in Switzerland, or in Europe, 1 in 180,000. So in Switzerland, we included that in 2014. I would expect 1 case in 2 years. But what we saw, because we also do the home monitoring for Msu D patients, what we saw in addition to different ratios, we saw that all the Msu D patients have low isovalerial-carnitine. And so what I did, I went back to all the data we had also for those babies that were screened for Msu D in Germany from 1999. And I must say, all those babies never got into intensive care. They never needed hemodialysis or hemofiltration or peritoneal. They all could be treated conventionally with diet from the first time they were detected by newborn screening, and they saved what you said, half a year or six weeks in intensive care unit, and this is cost saving and also saving of the baby, and it delays the need for liver transplant also. So if you detect them in the newborn period and treat them as good as possible, perfectly, then liver transplantation might be necessary not after 1, 2, 3, 5 years, but probably only in adulthood, if at all. So we have also one adult woman, just got a child. She herself has Msu D, is under perfect control. She sends regularly samples on dry blood samples to the screening lab. The result goes the next day, so we have a turnaround time 24 hours. And this is also possible, and should be possible. The results go to the dietitian, to the metabolic physician, in her case not a pediatrician anymore, and to the patient himself or herself, and this makes a very good monitoring and very good adherence to the diet possible. And coming back to newborn screening for Msu D, so we already had the values for leucine, isoleucine, which cannot be distinguished in the normal setting for newborn screening. Valine, and also alanine was already published, that alanine in cases of Msu D is always decreased. I didn't bring the metabolic pathway because I thought I have already showed you enough pathways. But then we added and calculated all possible ratios also to isovalerial-carnitine, and you see here in this color. Here we have the highest, the 99.9 centile for normal newborns, which is like 35, 30, around 35. And then for Msu D, for the classical ones, we have these ratios which is way over 100 normally. And the only thing that you might miss again are those cases with Msu D which have a defect in the E3 complex. And we have a few here in this one, and these are the orange ones. Even those would not be 100% picked up, even with this ratio. So there's always still, some cases might be missed just because they don't have the right elevations. And just one remark again, carbohydrate infusion might prevent at least patients with Msu D from increasing the branched chain amino acids. This is already also published from a Düsseldorf group, I think 20 or 30 years ago, that a baby that was on 20% glucose was missed by newborn screening. And they needed to make a leucine load in order to increase the amino acids accordingly. But these were two examples how you can use ratios and looking at more analytes and more ratios in order to pick up highly specific and sensitive with nearly no false positives, the cases with CPD1 deficiency and Msu D, which are extremely rare, but benefit a lot from newborn screening. Then I should talk about testing strategies for newborn screening in developing countries. So, but I think India is probably not a developing country in terms maybe for newborn screening. But I think my colleague before told you everything that's necessary to implement a nationwide or statewide newborn screening. And I think it's necessary to screen every baby. So every baby should have the opportunity to get newborn screening, and not only in private hospitals where parents can afford to pay for the test. So it should be universal, because the society has the benefit from patients with congenital hypothyroidism, which are not disabled, which have a normal intellectual ability when they're treated early. They go to school, they learn a job, they start working, and they increase the income of the society, rather than being hospitalized or in a care unit for disabled. So society should want to have newborn screening in order to prevent these disabilities. And it has already been said, newborn screening is not just a laboratory test. So it doesn't help when you detect all those cases with congenital hypothyroidism when you're not able to get them to treatment, and if you're not able after 10 years or 20 years to say, we detected all these babies with congenital hypothyroidism, and you can't tell what is the outcome. So you should have a program that also looks for the long-term outcome of those to show the benefit of a newborn screening. And it's always interaction between midwife, gynecologist, neonatologist who care for the babies when they're born in hospital. There are the local pediatricians that care for the patients afterwards. Of course, you have the screening laboratory, and you have the pediatric specialists, metabolic specialists, endocrine specialists, immunologists, whatever comes, hematologists. And they all need to talk to each other. So you need really a team and a system that provides the right information to the right people at the right time, in order that the parents get the right information, that they know why they should take the medication, give the medication, and not say after half a year or when now it's grown out of this problem and stop medication. And this is sometimes a problem in Switzerland also, and in Germany in the lab it was the same, to get the feedback from the specialists to the lab whether the disorder has been confirmed. So whatever you do, if you have the confirmatory test in your own lab, in the screening lab, that helps to get this feedback. And about targeted disorders, we heard also in the previous talk. I think there's not much to say about this. This would be in a ranking that I would say maybe hemoglobinopathies I didn't have on my screen because that's not in Germany and Switzerland not so big problem. Also, glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase is rather not a problem. But all these disorders like CH, we heard it's easy to detect, cheap test, cheap medication, and easy medication. Also biotinidase deficiency, easy medication. You just give the vitamin, biotin, and that's it. MCAT deficiency, we already talked about that. Phenylketonuria also is easy to treat with a diet. To have a dietitian in the team would be preferable, that teach the parents to adhere to the diet. Glutaric aciduria type 1 is also one disorder which is highly desirable, because in glutaric aciduria there seems to be a vulnerable phase where the babies or the children can decompensate in a metabolic crisis, and after 1.5 or 2 years the devastating effect of any crisis seems to be stopped. So once you get the children over these 2.5 years, you're nearly on the safe side. And we detected at least 3 adults with glutaric aciduria type 1. And there are mothers that have been detected by low free carnitine during newborn screening, which then turned out to be glutaric aciduria type 1 in the mother, which was nearly normal, so no intellectual problems, no other disability. And we detected one mathematics student during workup for beta oxidation defects as a safety test before a fasting test. So he was volunteered to do a fasting test for some other reason, and we just wanted to test MCAT or rule out beta oxidation defects in order that they don't decompensate in this sleeping lab where there were no nurses and no supervision there overnight. And he had a GA1, so perfect math student, perfect IQ and everything in the mid-20s with classical MRI, so you saw the holes in the brain. So I thought, we don't need much of our brain to be brilliant. And otherwise, really just normal. And of course, we saw a more extensive list in the talk before. And then a future of newborn screening. So I think that is what everybody then thinks of, or what's next generation sequencing, whole exome, whole genome sequencing. I don't think that will come within the next 5 or 10 years. I think it's a good tool when you use it for confirmatory testing. You could put all your disorders that you have in your screening panel on a gene panel where you can do confirmatory testing with one panel for all your positive newborn screening samples. So you could downside, or you could increase the number of tests that you use for this panel. You can make it more. You can analyze more frequently with low cost and have confirmatory test for your screening panel. This could be like a targeted panel that could be tailored to your screening panel. But I think to screen all newborns with next generation sequencing, think of 24 million newborns per year in India doing next generation sequencing. I think that's, you don't have you need all Silicon Valley, or you need all the computers of Google to process those data. And then of course, when you do that, you get a lot of information that you probably don't want to know. And a lot of information, a lot of mutations where you don't know whether they they have any significance. So I hope this doesn't start before I go into pension. And this is the Zurich Children's Hospital, and I'm able to be here because all of my colleagues do the work in the lab, which I must also admit. And all the data that I present always are produced not by myself. A lot of things have been processed by me, but the work is done by my colleagues, of course. And I thank you for your attention. Questions or comments?
For a country like India, what technique do you think is good for newborn screening? For a country like India, with the huge numbers, cost factor, should we go for something like immunoassay, which is probably less costly when compared to immunofluorescence techniques?
I think the Tandem mass spectrometry, when you look at the benefits and the cost, it might be a kind of a cost of you need to invest in instrumentation, but the cost per test are comparative also when you look at the number of disorders that you can screen for compared to those classical immunoassays. It's more expensive, but you have like 30 or 40 disorders that you can screen for compared to only one. And I think it's to start with, I would surely start with TSH if you have nothing at the beginning. Start with TSH and then get your system running with communication, with training and information to the midwives, to the birth clinics and everybody that is involved in the whole team, and then increase and expand step by step, and then choose what is suitable. And if you have labs that have already experience with expanded newborn screening, you can help each other, and you can also find help and information and in other countries that do this screening. So I think for India, I would not say don't do Tandem MS screening. It's just the opposite. You have the examples here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Raj, for the wonderful session. Since we're well past the normal dinner time, I would now request Dr. Jairam to hand over a token of our appreciation to Dr. Nagesh.
You come, Karthik. Okay. Thank you so much.
Is there a before and now photo opportunity, sir? That's a trend now.
Yeah. It's forever.
And I would now request Dr. Sujay to hand over a token of our appreciation to Dr. Ralph as well. So I'd like to end the session by thanking all of you who have attended and listened with a lot of patience. I also would request for you to please fill up the feedback forms that have been given so that we can better ourselves in the coming sessions of future. And I would also invite all of you to join us for dinner. Thank you very much.
I don't think he's there anymore. Oh, then maybe I don't. I've not heard of her. I've been there now.
slide is the banker.
In Switzerland, and especially in Zurich, our metabolic pediatricians, they want to